I watched Marcus forge my signature on the tax return with the same penmanship he'd used to sign our marriage certificate 3 years ago. Smooth, confident strokes. He didn't even look guilty. Babe, you know Sienna's in a really bad place right now, he said, not meeting my eyes as he filled in the routing number for his personal account, not our joint one. Her credit card debt is astronomical. If we don't help, she could lose everything. Sienna, his best friend since college. The woman who had spent the last 3 years slowly poisoning my marriage with late-night calls, emergency brunches, and a never-ending stream of crises that only Marcus could solve. In my first life, I'd fought him on this exact moment. I'd screamed, cried, threatened divorce. He'd called me selfish, cruel, unwilling to help someone in need. We'd fought for weeks. I'd eventually given in, broken and exhausted, believing his promises that this was the last time, that Sienna would pay me back. She never did. And 6 months later, when I'd needed that money for my mother's experimental cancer treatment, Marcus had looked me dead in the eye and said, "I told you we should have saved it. This is on you." My mother died 3 weeks after that conversation. I filed for divorce the day after her funeral, but Marcus had been smart. He'd drained our accounts, maxed out credit cards in my name, and disappeared with Sienna to Costa Rica. I'd died alone in a one-bedroom apartment, drowning in debt I didn't create from a heart attack at 37. My last thought had been wondering if he'd even come to my funeral. Then I woke up on my 28th birthday, 3 years into our marriage, with all those memories burning in my mind like acid. Of course, I said now, my voice soft and understanding. I placed my hand over his. Sienna's practically family. We should help her. Marcus's eyes widened with surprise, then relief, then something uglier, triumph. He thought he'd won. Again. Really? You're not going to fight me on this? Why would I? I smiled at him, the same smile I'd given him on our wedding day. You're right. She needs us. How much is the refund this year? 12,000.
Yes.
He said it quickly, like if he rushed the words, they'd hurt less.
Wow.
I know it's a lot, but
cool.
it's fine. I squeezed his hand. In my first life, my tax return had been 8,000. This time, I'd worked overtime, taken every freelance project I could find, maximized every deduction. I'd made sure the number was big enough to matter. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Make sure it's documented properly. I want Sienna to sign a loan agreement, legal and binding. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared weeks ago. I had my friend Sarah draw this up. She's a lawyer, remember? She said we need to protect ourselves. Marcus hesitated. In my first life, I'd been too tired to think of contracts, too worn down to protect myself. But this time, I'd learned something. Crucial. The IRS doesn't care about verbal promises. Sure, he finally said. That's actually really smart. He had no idea how smart. I watched him sign my name one more time, his forgery perfect and incriminating. I didn't stop him. Instead, I handed him my phone. Here, take a photo of the completed return for our records. He did, beaming at me like I was the most understanding wife in the world. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I'd already filed my taxes 3 weeks ago. Electronically, legitimately. The IRS had already processed my return and direct deposited my $12,000 into a brand new account he knew nothing about. The paper return he was filling out? It was about to become evidence of tax fraud. The loan agreement I'd prepared? It had a clause buried in the legal jargon that made Sienna equally liable for any tax penalties or legal consequences arising from the loan. Sarah had been thorough. I'd also done something else. Something I'd learned from my years in accounting before Marcus had convinced me to quit my job and work part-time so I could support him better. I'd made copies of everything, every forged signature, every fraudulent document, every text message between Marcus and Sienna, which I'd recovered from our phone records. In my first life, I'd been naive, trusting. A woman who believed in the goodness of people even when they showed me exactly who they were. Death had cured me of that. I'll drop this at the post office tomorrow, Marcus said, kissing my forehead. You're amazing. You know that? I know, I said.
Yes. Oh my God,
That
yes.
night, Marcus went to Sienna's apartment to
Yes.
deliver the good news.
Yep.
He'd be
Yes, oh my
gone
God,
for
yep, one of the
hours.
singles
He
pass.
always was when he
Refund the
visited her.
trials. No, you
In my
edit it, you
first life,
edit
I'd tortured myself imagining what they were
it.
doing.
The slither
This time, I didn't
What
care.
were
I
the
had work to
slither
do.
oh
I pulled out my
God.
laptop and logged into the IRS portal, checking the status of my legitimate return. Processed, accepted. Refund issued, perfect. Then I drafted an email to the IRS fraud division. Anonymous, untraceable, sent through a VPN Sarah had helped me set up. The email contained scanned copies of Marcus's forged return, photos of his fraudulent signature, and a detailed timeline of suspicious activity. I didn't send it yet. Timing mattered. Instead, I opened my second laptop, the one Marcus didn't know about, and reviewed my exit strategy. In my first life, I'd had nothing when I finally tried to leave. This time, I'd been preparing for 3 years. I had my own apartment, leased under my maiden name. Marcus didn't know I'd changed my name back legally 6 months ago. The paperwork was sealed, a favor from Sarah's judge friend. I had a job offer from my old firm starting in 2 months. They thought I was just exploring options. My new boss, Diana, was a woman who'd escaped her own bad marriage. She understood. I had copies of everything: bank statements, credit card bills, emails, text, messages. I documented every manipulation, every lie, every dollar Marcus had taken from our joint account to spend on Sienna. And I had something Marcus could never touch: my mother's life insurance policy, which she'd updated a month before her death in my first life. This time, I'd convinced her to get her affairs in order early. She'd passed peacefully last year, and the money, $200,000, sat in an account Marcus had no access to. I was set. I just needed to wait for him to destroy himself. 3 days later, Marcus deposited the refund into his account. I watched the transaction appear on our joint account app. He'd linked it there proudly, like he wanted me to see how responsible he was being. The money went directly to pay off Sienna's credit cards, all 5 of them. Marcus sent me a screenshot of her crying tears of gratitude, her arms wrapped around him in what she probably thought was an innocent hug. In the photo, I could see the edge of her bedroom in the background, the same bedroom I'd seen in photos on Marcus's hidden Instagram account, the one he thought I didn't know about. "She's so relieved," Marcus texted me. "Thank you for being so understanding. I love you." "Love you too," I replied. 4 weeks later, the first letter arrived. I was at work when Marcus called, his voice tight with panic. "Emma, did you file our taxes already?" "What? No, you were going to do that, remember?" I made my voice confused, concerned. "Why?" "The IRS rejected my return. They're saying you already filed." "That's impossible. I gave you all my documents." "I know, but he paused. "They're saying a return was filed electronically on March 15th with your social security number." "That doesn't make sense." I frowned, selling the performance even though he couldn't see me. "Could it be identity theft?" "Maybe." He sounded uncertain. "I'll call them and figure it out." "Okay, keep me updated." I hung up and allowed myself a small smile. The trap was springing. Marcus called the IRS that afternoon. He spent 3 hours on hold, then another 2 hours speaking with increasingly senior representatives. By the time he got home that evening, he looked like he'd aged 5 years. "It gets worse," he said, dropping onto the couch. "Someone filed your taxes electronically and already received the refund. The IRS is opening a fraud investigation." Oh my God. I sat beside him, taking his hand. "What do we do?" "I don't know." He ran his other hand through his hair. "The problem is, I already filed a paper return with your signature. And I already received and spent that money." "What do you mean you already received it?" I made my eyes wide. "The IRS doesn't work that fast." He went very still. "Marcus?" He swallowed hard. The money Sienna got, that wasn't from the IRS. That was from my savings account. I was going to reimburse myself when your refund came through." "It was a lie." Of course. I'd checked his savings account. We'd had separate accounts at his insistence, but I'd gained access during my reconnaissance. He'd had barely $2,000 in there. The $12,000 had come from somewhere else. Where did you get $12,000? I asked quietly. That's not important right now. He stood up, pacing. What's important is that we figure out who stole your identity and, Marcus. My voice was sharper now. Where did you get the money? He wouldn't look at me. I took out a personal loan. You took out a loan? In whose name? Silence. Marcus, answer me. Yours, he whispered. I used your information. I was going to pay it back when the refund came, so I didn't think. You committed fraud. I stood up, letting shock and anger fill my voice. You took out a loan in my name without my permission, and you used it to pay off another woman's debt. Sienna's not just another woman. She's my friend, and she was desperate. I don't care, I shouted, 3 years of rage from my first life, carefully controlled until now, poured into my voice. You committed identity theft. You forged my signature. You took out loans in my name. I was going to tell you, he said desperately. I just needed to wait until what? Until the IRS gave you my refund so you could hide what you did? I grabbed my purse. I'm going to Sarah's. Don't call me. Emma, wait. I slammed the door on his protests. I didn't go to Sarah's. I went to my secret apartment, poured myself a glass of wine, and waited. The next letter from the IRS arrived 5 days later. This one was addressed to both of us, sent to our home. Marcus called me immediately. They're saying I committed tax fraud, he said, his voice shaking. They want to know why I filed a paper return with a forged signature after you'd already filed electronically. Emma, they're treating this like a criminal case. Did you tell them the truth? I can't. Tell them the truth. If I admit I forged your signature, I could go to prison. Maybe you should have thought of that before you committed a felony. My voice was ice. Emma, please, I need you to tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission to sign for you. Tell them, no. The word hung between us like a guillotine. What? I said no, Marcus. I'm not lying to the federal government for you. But I'm your husband. You're a fraud, I corrected. And I'm done protecting you. I hung up. 3 hours later, Sienna called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Emma, please, you have to help Marcus. Her voice was tearful, desperate. He did this for me. If he goes to prison, it's my fault. You're right, I said calmly. It is your fault. I'll pay the money back, every cent. Just please don't let them prosecute him. How exactly are you going to pay back $12,000, Sienna? From what I understand, you're drowning in debt. I'll figure it out. I'll get a loan. From who? You've maxed out every credit card you have. You've borrowed from everyone you know. The only reason you're not in collections is because my husband committed fraud to save you. She started crying harder. Please, Emma, I love him. I can't lose him. There it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind the word friendship for 3 years. You love him, I repeated flatly. We didn't mean for it to happen. We've been in love for years, but he was already married to you, and we tried to fight it, but how long? What? How long have you been sleeping with my husband, Sienna? Silence. Then, quietly, 2 years. 2 years. Half of our marriage. While I'd been working myself to exhaustion to support us, to be the perfect wife, he'd been building a second life with her. In my first life, I'd only found out about the affair after the divorce, through mutual friends. He'd married her 6 months after. I died. They'd honeymoon in Costa Rica with my money. This time I had her confession on recording. The call was being saved automatically to the cloud. Thank you for your honesty, I said. Goodbye, Sienna. Wait, I blocked her number. The IRS investigation moved forward with the efficiency of a federal agency that smelled blood. Marcus received a summons to appear for an interview. He called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Instead, I filed for divorce. Sarah served him the papers at our house along with a restraining order based on financial abuse and fraud. The look on his face, she told me later, was priceless. He tried to contest it, of course, but I had evidence, mountains of it, the forged tax returns, the loans taken out in my name, bank statements showing the transfers to Sienna, screenshots of their text messages recovered from our phone records, where they discussed their affair in explicit detail, and I had the recording of Sienna's confession. The divorce was finalized in 6 weeks. Marcus got nothing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, had looked at the evidence and declared him morally and legally bankrupt. But the best part, the truly satisfying part, came 3 months later. The IRS didn't just charge Marcus with tax fraud. They charged him with identity theft, wire fraud, and falsifying federal documents. The personal loan he'd taken out in my name? That triggered additional charges. And because Sienna had benefited from the fraud and had signed the loan agreement acknowledging the source of funds, she was charged as an accessory. The trial was brief. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding between spouses, but the prosecutor had my testimony, the documentary evidence, and the fact that I'd filed a police report for identity theft the day after Marcus admitted what he'd done. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution, plus penalties. The total came to $48,000. Sienna got 12 months and was jointly liable for the restitution. Neither of them could pay. Marcus had to declare bankruptcy. Sienna lost her apartment and moved back in with her parents in Ohio. I heard through mutual friends that they blamed me for everything. I was the vindictive ex-wife who'd destroyed their lives over money. I was cruel, heartless, unwilling to forgive. I didn't care. I moved into my apartment permanently, decorated it exactly how I wanted, but I started my new job and got promoted within 6 months. Diana became my mentor and then my friend. I began dating again, slowly, carefully. I met Andrew at a coffee shop. He was kind honest, and when I told him on our 3rd date that I was divorced and had trust issues, he'd just smiled and said, "We'll go at your pace." We'd been together for a year now. He'd met my friends, my colleagues. He knew about Marcus, about what had happened. He'd never once made me feel like I'd overreacted. "He committed a crime," Andrew had said simply. "You just made sure he faced consequences. That's not revenge. That's justice." Maybe he was right, or maybe it was revenge. Either way, I slept well at night. 2 years after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him. It had been forwarded through my lawyer. He wasn't allowed to contact me directly because of the restraining order. The letter was 3 pages of self-pity. He'd lost everything. His career was over. Sienna had left him the moment he went to prison. He was living with his parents, working at a grocery store, trying to rebuild his life. He ended the letter with, "I hope you're happy now." I wrote back. One sentence. I am. I never heard from him again. 5 years after my rebirth, I stood in the kitchen of the house Andrew and I had bought together, watching him make pancakes for our daughter. She was 2, with his dark hair and my eyes, and she was chattering about the birds outside the window. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Guess who just got out of prison?" I glanced at the message and deleted it without responding. Marcus's release date had been marked on my calendar, but not because I cared. It was just information, like knowing when to change the oil in my car. He was someone who had existed in my past, both pasts. He had no place in my future. "Everything okay?" Andrew asked, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Everything's perfect," I said. And it was. The funny thing about Rebirth is that people assume it's about getting revenge. But that's not quite right. Revenge is just a tool, a means to an end. What Rebirth really gives you is clarity. The ability to see people for who they truly are, stripped of hope and illusion. The knowledge of exactly how much you're worth and how little you should tolerate. In my first life, I died believing I was unlovable. that I'd somehow failed as a wife, that my suffering was my own fault. In my second life, I'd learned the truth. Some people are just takers. They'll drain you dry and convince you it's love. They'll forge your signature and call it trust. They'll destroy you and blame you for breaking. Marcus had taught me that. He just hadn't meant to. The tax fraud had been elegant in its simplicity. He'd committed a crime. I'd simply ensured he faced the consequences. The IRS had done the rest. I hadn't planted evidence or lied. I'd just documented the truth. And I'd made sure Sienna went down with him. She'd known what she was doing. She'd signed that loan agreement knowing the money was from my tax return, knowing Marcus had forged my signature. She'd benefited from fraud. In my first life, she'd walked away clean, married Marcus, and lived off the money that should have saved my mother. This time, justice had caught up with her. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty, if I should have been more forgiving, more understanding, if I should have given Marcus a chance to explain, to make amends. Then I'd remember my mother's face when I told her we couldn't afford the treatment. I'd remember dying alone in that apartment, drowning in debt while Marcus and Sienna sipped margaritas on a beach. No, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Mama, pancake! My daughter reached for me with syrup-sticky hands. I picked her up, kissing her forehead. What did we say? Peas. That's my girl. Andrew plated the pancakes and we sat together, the three of us, in the warm morning light. This was my life now, not the one Marcus had tried to trap me in, not the one I'd died in. This one. The one I'd built from the ashes of my first death and the lessons of my rebirth. The IRS letter, when it had arrived at Marcus's prison, must have been a shock. The agency didn't just want their money back. They wanted penalties, interest, and damages. They'd attached his wages for years to come. Every paycheck garnished, every tax, return seized. He'd tried to argue that he'd already served his time, that he'd paid his debt to society. The IRS agent had apparently laughed and said, "Sir, you defrauded the federal government. We always get our money." I'd heard this through Sarah, who'd heard it from the prosecutor. We'd all had a good laugh over drinks. To the IRS, Sarah had toasted, the only government agency more ruthless than my divorce practice. We'd clinked glasses and I'd thought, Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd thought the worst I could do was divorce him. He'd thought marriage made me weak, that love made me stupid. He'd forgotten that I was an accountant, that I understood money, taxes, paper trails, that I knew exactly how to document fraud. And he'd never known about my rebirth, never known that I'd lived through this once before, that I'd learned from my mistakes, that I'd come back with 3 years of knowledge he didn't have. In chess, they call it zugzwang, a position where any move you make will weaken your position. Marcus had been in zugzwang from the moment I'd handed him that loan agreement. If he'd refused to sign it, Sienna would have known he was hiding something. She would have questioned him, maybe even left him. If he'd signed it, which he did, he'd created legal evidence of his fraud. Either way, he lost. I'd made sure of it. "You're thinking about him again," Andrew said, pulling me back to the present. "How can you tell?" "You get this look, like you're doing complex math in your head." He smiled. "Want to talk about it?" "No," I said. "I want to eat pancakes with my family." "Good choice." Later that night, after our daughter was asleep and Andrew was reading in bed, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and studied my reflection. I looked different than I had in my first life. Happier, healthier. The stress lines around my eyes had faded. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost from skipping meals to save money for Marcus's emergencies. I looked like someone who'd survived. Because I had. The thing about revenge is that it's supposed to be empty, hollow. People say it doesn't bring peace, that it doesn't change what happened, that it makes you just as bad as the person who hurt you. Those people have never been properly betrayed. Revenge didn't bring my mother back. It didn't erase the pain of Marcus's affair or the humiliation of being used. But it did give me justice. It did make sure he couldn't do to someone else what he'd done to me. It did prove that I wasn't weak, wasn't stupid, wasn't deserving of the abuse I'd endured. And most importantly, it cleared the path for this life. The good one. The one where I woke up every morning next to a man who loved me, where I had a career I was proud of, where my daughter would grow up seeing her mother as strong, not broken. That was worth more than empty forgiveness ever could have been. I turned off the bathroom light and went to bed 10 years. After my rebirth, I was promoted to CFO of my company. The announcement made the local business news. I did an interview about work-life balance and financial literacy. That night, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. I saw your interview. You've done well for yourself. I always knew you were smart. I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I hope you can forgive me someday. M. I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I clicked report as spam and deleted it. Forgiveness wasn't something he got to ask for. It wasn't a gift I owed him. It wasn't a box he could check to make himself feel better about what he'd done. Forgiveness was mine to give or withhold, and I chose to withhold it. Not out of spite, not out of anger, simply because he didn't deserve it. Andrew found me at my desk, staring at the empty inbox. You okay? Yeah, I said, just deleting old emails. He kissed the top of my head. Come to bed, big day tomorrow. Tomorrow, the day I was giving the keynote speech at a financial conference about protecting yourself from financial abuse in relationships. I'd been working on it for months. The speech opened with a story. A hypothetical woman who'd trusted her husband with her finances, only to discover too late that he'd been stealing from her, how she'd lost everything, how she'd rebuilt. I didn't mention that the woman was me, or that I'd lived it twice. But I ended the speech with this. Trust is beautiful, but documentation is better. Love is wonderful, but protecting yourself is essential. And if someone you love is asking you to compromise your financial security, your legal safety, or your peace of mind, that's not love, that's abuse. And you deserve better. The speech got a standing ovation. 3 women came up to me afterward, crying, telling me their stories. I gave them Sarah's card and told them they weren't alone. One of them asked me, how did you know that you needed to protect yourself? I thought about my first life, about dying alone, about the lessons written in my bones. Experience, I said simply. Very expensive experience. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. 15 years after my rebirth, I received an invitation to speak at a women's financial empowerment summit. The topic was overcoming financial betrayal. I accepted immediately. The night before the summit, I did something I hadn't done in years. I searched for Marcus online. It took a while to find him. He'd moved states, changed jobs multiple times. His Facebook profile was sparse. A few photos of him alone, looking older and tired. His relationship status was blank. According to his LinkedIn, he was working as a bookkeeper at a small firm. Entry-level position, low pay. I felt nothing looking at his profile. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity. He was just a stranger who'd once been important and was now irrelevant. I closed the browser and never searched for him again. At the summit, I told my story, the real story this time. I'd gotten permission from my lawyer, confirmed that enough time had passed, that the case was closed and public record. I told them about the forged tax returns, the identity theft, the affair, the fraud. I told them about the IRS investigation and the satisfaction of watching justice unfold. And I told them about my rebirth, not literally, of course. I framed it as a wake-up call, a moment of clarity where I'd realized I deserved better. I could have forgiven him, I said to the audience of 200 women. I could have accepted his apologies, believed his promises, given him another chance. That's what society tells us to do, right? Be understanding, be compassionate, be the bigger person. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But here's what I learned. Being the bigger person doesn't mean accepting abuse. It means recognizing your worth and refusing to settle for less. It means documenting everything, protecting yourself, legally and financially, and refusing to be manipulated by guilt or obligation. The applause started before I finished the sentence. After the talk, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, with tear-stained cheeks and shaking hands. My boyfriend just asked me to co-sign a loan for him, she whispered. He says if I don't do it, it means I don't trust him. But something feels wrong. I took her hands in mine. Listen to that feeling. That's your intuition protecting you. But what if I'm wrong? What if he really does love me and I'm just being paranoid? If he loves you, he won't ask you to risk your financial future for him. Love doesn't demand cosigns. Love doesn't require proof in the form of debt. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. I needed to hear that. I gave her my card. If you need help getting out, call me. I know people. Lawyers, accountants, counselors. You don't have to do this alone. She clutched the card like a lifeline. That night, I added her to the list of women I'd helped over the years. There were dozens now. Women who'd reached out after my speeches, my interviews, my articles. Women who'd been where I was. I'd helped them file police reports, find lawyers, document abuse. I'd helped them open secret bank accounts and plan exit strategies. I'd helped them see that they deserved better. And every single one of them I thought of as my redemption. Not for what I'd done to Marcus, I didn't regret that, but for what I'd failed to do in my first life. I'd failed to save myself then, but I could save others now. 20 years after my rebirth, I published a book, The Exit Strategy, a financial guide to leaving toxic relationships. It became a bestseller. The book laid out, step by step, how to protect yourself financially before, during, and after leaving an abusive relationship, how to document fraud, gather evidence, protect assets, how to work with lawyers and mansi, as accountants, how to rebuild credit, how to start over. The dedication read, for everyone who died in their first life and deserves a second one. Only I knew what it really meant. The book tour took me across the country. In every city, women came to me with their stories. Forged signatures, stolen identities, maxed out credit cards, loans they never agreed to. The details were different, but the core was always the same. Someone who claimed to love them had betrayed that trust for money. And every time I told them, document everything, protect yourself. You are not responsible for their choices or their consequences. In Seattle, a woman asked me, but what about forgiveness? Don't we owe it to them to try? I'd heard this question 100 times. My answer was always the same. Forgiveness is a personal choice, not an obligation. If forgiving them helps you heal, then forgive them. But don't confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still refuse to let them back into your life. You can forgive someone and still hold them accountable for their actions. But isn't that cold? No, I said firmly, and it's self-preservation. And there's nothing cold about valuing yourself enough to set boundaries. The woman nodded slowly, processing. After the event, she approached me with a notebook filled with photographs, bank statements, and emails. I've been documenting everything for 6 months, she said. I'm almost ready to leave. Good, I said. When you are, make sure you have a lawyer. Don't announce your plans, just go. Thank you, she whispered. I watched her walk away, spine straight, shoulders back. She was going to make it. They usually did, once they decided to save themselves. 25 years after my rebirth, Andrew and I celebrated our 23rd wedding anniversary. Our daughter was in college, studying accounting. My influence, she said with a laugh. We'd added a son along the way, who was now 16 and obsessed with basketball. We were sitting on our porch watching the sunset when Andrew said, "Do you ever think about him, your ex?" I considered the question. Sometimes, I admitted, but not the way you're thinking. What way, then? I think about the woman I was when I was married to him, how small I made myself, how much I tolerated, how close I came to losing everything. I took Andrew's hand, and I think about how grateful I am that I got a second chance. We all deserve second chances, Andrew said. I smiled but didn't correct him. He didn't know about my rebirth. Nobody did. It was my secret, my burden, my gift. But he was right about one thing. Everyone deserved a second chance to build the life they wanted. I'd just taken mine more literally than most. That night, I had a dream. I was back in that one-bedroom apartment from my first life, dying alone, my heart giving out from stress and grief and exhaustion. But this time, as I felt myself Fading, I looked around the empty room and smiled. Not this time, I whispered. And I woke up in my bed, Andrew sleeping beside me, morning light streaming through the windows. I got up, made coffee, and checked my email. There was a message from a nonprofit organization that helped women escape financial abuse. They wanted me to join their board of directors. I replied immediately. I'd be honored. 30 years after my rebirth, I retired from my CFO position. The company threw me a party. My colleagues gave speeches about my leadership, my mentorship, my integrity. I thought about Marcus, who'd spent the last 3 decades working dead-end jobs, never able to recover from his criminal record, who'd never remarried, never rebuilt, never escaped the consequences of his choices. I thought about Sienna, who'd moved back to Ohio and, according to occasional social media stalking, was working at her family's hardware store. Still single, still bitter, based on her posts about how the world was against her. I thought about the life I'd lost and the life I'd built, and I realized I'd won. Not because they'd suffered, though they had. Not because I'd gotten revenge, though I had. I'd won because I'd survived, because I'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into purpose, because I'd saved myself and then taught others to save themselves. That was the real revenge. Not their punishment, but my happiness. At my retirement party, my daughter gave a speech. She talked about growing up watching me help women in crisis. She talked about learning from me that kindness didn't mean weakness, that compassion didn't require self-sacrifice, that love should never cost you your dignity. My mom taught me that you can be soft and still have sharp edges, she said. That you can forgive without forgetting. That you can move forward without leaving yourself behind. She didn't know she was describing the woman who'd died and been reborn. She just knew me as the mother who'd raised her with love and boundaries, who'd taught her to value herself, who'd shown her that women could be both nurturing and ruthless when necessary. As I listened to her speak, I felt a peace I'd never experienced in my first life. This was enough. This was everything. After the party, Andrew and I drove home in comfortable silence. We'd been married for 28 years. We'd raised 2 children. We'd built a life based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. Everything Marcus had promised and failed to deliver, Andrew had given me freely. "What are you thinking about?" Andrew asked as we pulled into our driveway. "How lucky I am," I said. It was the truth. That night, I wrote in my journal, a practice I'd started after my rebirth, documenting this life so I'd never forget what I'd survived. Marcus taught me that not everyone deserves forgiveness, I wrote. He taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is refuse to give someone another chance to hurt you. He taught me that justice matters, that consequences matter, that holding people accountable isn't cruel, it's necessary. I paused, pen hovering over paper. But most importantly, he taught me what I'm worth. And that lesson, painful as it was, made everything else possible. I closed the journal and put it away. 35 years after my rebirth, I received a letter. Not from Marcus, he'd given up trying to contact me decades ago, but from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Jennifer. She was 28 years old. She'd just discovered that her husband had been forging her signature and taking out loans in her name. She'd read my book. She'd followed my advice. She'd documented everything, hired a lawyer, and reported him to the police. Now he was facing charges, and she was facing the aftermath. "I don't know if I did the right thing," she wrote. "Everyone tells me I should have tried to work it out, that I'm overreacting, that I'm destroying his life over money." I wrote back the same day. "You did exactly the right thing. His choices destroyed his life, not you. Money matters because it represents security, freedom, and trust. He stole all 3 from you. You simply made sure he faced the consequences of his theft." I included my phone number. "If you need support, call me. You're not alone." She called me a week later, crying. "The IRS just charged him with fraud. He's begging me to drop the complaint. His family is calling me vindictive. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not losing your mind," I said firmly. "You're experiencing gaslighting from people who benefited from you staying silent. Stay strong. Document every conversation. Don't engage with his family. And remember, you didn't commit fraud. He did. Thank you, she whispered. I just needed to hear that I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. You're brave. We talked for an hour. I gave her the names of therapists who specialized in financial abuse. I connected her with my network of lawyers and accountants. I told her about the support groups I'd helped establish. And I told her something I'd learned from my own journey. 5 years from now, you'll look back on this moment as the day you saved your own life. It won't feel that way now. It'll feel terrible, but one day you'll wake up free and you'll understand. She called me a year later to tell me she'd gotten divorced, rebuilt her credit, and started her own business. Her ex-husband had been sentenced to 2 years in prison. I'm happy, she said, sounding surprised by her own words, and for the first time in years, I'm actually happy. Good, I said. Yes, you deserve it. 40 years after my rebirth, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. Nothing serious, just age and genetics catching up with me. But it reminded me of my first death, alone in that apartment, heart giving out from stress. This time, I was surrounded by family. Andrew, our children, our grandchildren. They filled my hospital room with flowers and laughter and love. You're not allowed to die, my daughter said, squeezing my hand. You have too much work left to do. She was right. I'd recently launched a foundation to help women escape financial abuse. It provided legal services, financial counseling, and emergency funds for women in crisis. In its first year, we'd helped 300 women. I plan to help 3,000 more. I'm not going anywhere, I promised her. And I meant it. I died once already. I wasn't planning to do it again anytime soon. 50 years after my rebirth, I celebrated my 78th birthday surrounded by the life I'd built. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a legacy of helping thousands of women escape abuse. Andrew had passed away 2 years earlier, peacefully in his sleep. I missed him every day, but I wasn't alone. My children visited often. My grandchildren called me weekly. My foundation continued to grow. At my birthday party, someone asked me about my first marriage. It was a young woman, a journalist, writing a piece about my foundation. What happened to your first husband? She asked. The one who committed the fraud? I thought about Marcus. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd died 5 years ago, liver failure. He'd drunk himself to death slowly, his life never recovering from the consequences of his choices. I'd felt nothing when I heard. Not satisfaction, not grief, just nothing. He's gone, I said simply. And I survived. Do you regret how you handled it, turning him in? I looked at this young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and I chose my words carefully. I regret marrying him. I regret trusting him. I regret not seeing the red flags earlier. I paused. But turning him in, holding him accountable, protecting myself, no, I've never regretted that for a single second. Even though it destroyed his life? He destroyed his own life the moment he decided to forge my signature and steal from me. I just made sure there were consequences. The journalist scribbled notes, then looked up. You've helped thousands of women over the years. Do you think they've all found the same peace you have? Some have, some haven't. Healing isn't linear, I smiled. But I know that every single one of them is better off for having chosen themselves over someone who hurt them. That night, alone in my house, I thought about my 2 lives. In my first life, I'd been a victim, trusting, naive, destroyed by someone who claimed to love me. In my second life, I'd been a survivor, strategic, careful, protected by knowledge and planning. The difference between the 2 lives wasn't just the outcome, it was the choice. In my first life, I'd chosen to believe in the good in people, even when they showed me their darkness. In my second life, I'd chosen to believe people when they showed me who they were. That choice, to trust, evidence over hope, to value self-preservation over forgiveness, to demand accountability over acceptance, had made all the difference. I'd saved myself, and then I'd taught thousands of other women to do the same. That was my legacy. Not the revenge, though that had been satisfying, not the money or the career or the awards. My legacy was every woman who'd read my book, heard my speech, or received help from my foundation and decided to save herself. Every woman who documented the abuse instead of ignoring it. Every woman who called a lawyer instead of making excuses. Every woman who chose her own safety over someone else's feelings. They were my legacy. They were my redemption. And they were the reason I'd been given a second chance at life. On my 80th birthday, my granddaughter, Jennifer's namesake, actually, came to me with a problem. "Grandma," she said nervously, "my boyfriend wants me to add him to my savings account. He says it's because he trusts me and wants us to share everything." I looked at this brilliant young woman who'd just graduated college, who had her whole life ahead of her, and I felt my heart crack. History trying to repeat itself. "What do you want to do?" I asked carefully. "I don't know. I love him, but something feels wrong about it." Listen to that feeling. But what if I'm just being paranoid? What if I'm sabotaging our relationship because of trust issues? I took her hands in mine, these old hands that had signed so many documents, written so many checks, forged by someone who claimed to love me. "Trust isn't given blindly," I said. "Trust is earned. And someone who loves you doesn't ask you to prove your love by risking your financial security." But he says, "I don't care what he says. I care what he does. And what he's doing is asking you to make yourself vulnerable for his benefit. That's not love, that's manipulation." Tears filled her eyes. "I was afraid you'd say that." "What does your gut tell you?" "That I should run. Then run and don't look back." She left that day and ended the relationship. 2 weeks later, she found out through friends that he'd been tens of thousands of dollars in debt and had been planning to drain her account and disappear. She called me sobbing with relief. "You saved me, Grandma." "No," I corrected gently. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." That's the thing about rebirth, I realized. It's not just about getting a second chance at your own life. It's about using that second chance to make sure others don't need one. I'd died once because I didn't know how to protect myself. I'd been reborn with the knowledge to save myself and the responsibility to share that knowledge. Every woman I helped was a ripple in time. A life changed, a cycle broken, a future reclaimed. Marcus had taught me about betrayal, about cruelty, about the darkness in human hearts. But my rebirth had taught me something more. Important, that surviving wasn't enough, that healing required purpose, that the best revenge wasn't making your enemies suffer, it was making sure they couldn't create more victims. I'd spent 50 years building that purpose, helping women escape, teaching them to document, to protect, to value themselves. And now, at 80 years old, I could look back on 2 lives and know that the second one had meaning. I'd turned my death into a mission, my pain into purpose, my revenge into revolution. And when my time finally came, when this body wore out and I faced whatever came next, I would go peacefully, knowing I'd used my second chance well. I'd saved myself, and then I'd saved thousands of others. That was enough. That was everything. That was the real story of my rebirth. Not the revenge I'd taken on one man, but the liberation I'd offered to countless women who'd needed exactly what I'd learned. You could survive betrayal. You could rebuild. You could thrive. And you never, ever had to forgive someone who didn't deserve it. That was my truth,
Heck
my
yeah.
legacy, and my gift to every
We're
woman
about
who
to go
came
to ads.
after me.
I'm so sorry. Couche, you were just follower number 4444. Congratulations and thank you. We need to show us your palette, redeem true. I'll do it for free. That's our little secret. We're about to go to ads. It's 3 minutes of ads, once an hour. I'm so sorry. It's to keep interruptions to a minimum and to not have stinky pre-roll happen, because pre-roll is stinky. Stinks like shit. Right out of Red Dead 2. Really? Speed secret. Have you heard Take Me to Snurch? I'm devastated that I haven't, but no, I haven't. I need to know about it, though. You understand. Get that capitalism money. It's not even that much money. I wish I didn't even have to. If I could choose to not play them at all, I would. But they make you do it when you become an affiliate. It's so rude. Oh my god, thank you, Blue Skies. Psyduck knows. Hi, Psyduck.
Bitty. Want Bitty now?
Kim! Thank you for the biddies. Thanks, Cam. That's your ad money. That's not even. It's like 6 cents. The 6 cents of ad money. Yeah, they don't let you, I wish you could choose not to run them. It'd be great. But to be an affiliate, you have to run them. And then to be a partner, I mean, yeah. Don't think you have a choice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cam. Wendy, got it. Let's see in here. Wow. Seems silly for a new streamer like me to run ads. Thanks, Bezos. Yeah, I'll make sure not to spend that 5 cents all in one place. I know. It's like, can I just build community and, you know, not have to be like, sorry, you have to be fucking capitalismed too. Yeah, it's annoying. No, I throw it in Discord. Oh, do it. Yeah, do it. Sorry. Post it in memes. Heck yeah. Thank you again for the biddies, Cam. Bitty. Want bitty now. Top says thriving. It's a thrumming. Oh, yeah, condensed. What does it mean? Thrumming? Hi, Psyduck. Oh, hi, Chips Runner. How you doing? What's good? Is it the club? Yeah, it's the clubhouse in the background. Yeah. yeah. That's the clubhouse. Yep. Exactly. You can go in there for a little post-match brewski, little brew dog in the clubhouse. Yep. Exactly. Actually, an indie comic creator. We'll work on my book, on my other project. Oh, nice. Okay. This is the 18th tee. Exactly. Yes. This is the end. Mm-hmm. Would you golf here? You know, it's bare bones, but it gets the job done, and the community's really nice. So it's like, you know, the trade-off, I think, is worth it. We're back. By golly, we're back. Ah, that's interesting, Dreamer. Yeah, I've not spent much time on, like, in the YouTube live sphere, but I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, it's like the real-time kind of audience feedback. Not like feedback like do this, do that, but yeah, the interactive nature. Most of my golf knowledge comes from one episode of Midsummer Murders. That's a good source.